Hey everyone, Al Fragnoli, Legal Leaders. We have got a familiar face with us today, and Dr. Will Ramey. Will, I think this is the third time we've had you on the podcast. Absolutely love chatting with you. You provide so much great insight on some of the research and some of the work surrounding leadership that you've been doing. You're a former Army officer. You're going to be sharing with us some great stuff on shared leadership, some stuff about your time in the Army. You've talked about toxic leadership. You've talked about your time in the military as well when we brought you on for a special on Veterans Day. But thank you so much for coming on with us. We truly appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, Al. I always appreciate the conversations that we have and the opportunity to share some of what I've learned and my experiences. So I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, it is an absolute honor to be chatting with you. Absolutely love talking to you about leadership. Why don't you talk to us, Will, a little bit about this concept that you've done some research behind on shared leadership? Maybe talk a little bit about that and then share some stories about your time in the military as well around this concept of shared leadership.
I'd absolutely love to, Al. So, thank you for the opportunity. Shared leadership is something that I came across when I was working on my dissertation in the DBA program at Drexel. I have to credit first and foremost Lauren DiNicenzo, Michael Kuchenberger, and John Matthew, three of the researchers that I came across who has they've worked in shared leadership. They've done research in the field, and it really started to open my mind on a shift in what leadership is and how it can be seen. So when you think of leadership, typically you picture that leader, charismatic, enthusiastic. They have that essence, that aura about them. And when you go back and think about leadership, starting with the industrial age, it was the command and control, the centralized leadership, and it was based on position and authority and being directive, towards or with employees. And what we've found is, as we've become a more knowledge-based society and in business with this exchange of information, leaders can't be everywhere. They can't be omnipotent, they can't be all-knowing, and they don't have all of the skills, abilities, and attributes that it takes to really take a team through and to accelerate their performance. So leadership is not something that is just within a person. Leadership is an influential act that occurs between people, right? So think about that. I'm not saying you get rid of formal leaders. Formal leaders are always there. You have organizational structure, you have decision authority, things of that nature. But when you talk about work being done in more teams, leadership is a social interaction. It's that influence that occurs between people to get things done. So working with Lauren, I've shared that with you in the past. Lauren DiNicenzo was my chair at Drexel, phenomenal teams researcher, top of her class, top in her tier there when it comes in the world of academics. She really opened my mind up to this idea of shared leadership, and you'll think about teams that you've been on and what makes those teams the best. And it's when you have an opportunity to feel safe and feel comfortable, and you have the opportunity to have your voice be heard. You're together with this shared purpose. You feel empowered, you're motivated, you have an understanding of what it is you need. You're working with people who bring in these different functional areas and functional experts on your team, to solidify that. So what we came across through research is that there's certain elements that when they exist in an organization will have shared leadership emerge. And it's this concept that sharing leadership occurs within a team, between team members over time. But to have that, it starts with certain elements, one being the team environment itself. So think about the physical location of where you work. Is it collaborative? Do you have space to get together? Do you have opportunity to have spontaneous collisions with each other, to talk to one another, to exchange information? Moving from the physical environment, do you feel safe in that environment to take risk, to make mistakes? Is it a culture of learning? Is it a culture where you're expected to, when you're that functional expert, step up and own your part of the project or own your part of the operation? And then you move into team composition being another element. How is that team composed? Do you have the right skill in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, right? So diversity, inclusion, and that's a big thing that shared leadership that I think helps when you look at team composition. This idea of being inclusive of all team members on that team, to give them the opportunity to step in and influence each other to get a better solution and a better idea. And then you move into team processes. Does your team take time to look at transition processes, things that are happening in the planning stage of work or in between projects, or as an operation goes on, do you take time to back brief? Do you take time to do, in the military, we had after action reviews where we looked at what was supposed to happen, what did happen, what do you want to sustain, what do you want to improve, how do you move forward? Action processes that occur when work is being done. How do you measure performance? How does the team know what they're doing versus what they're supposed to be doing, and if they're doing it well? And then interpersonal, interrelational processes. How do people deal with each other? What type of communication is tolerated or expected? How is conflict resolved when it comes up? Because conflict is inevitable, but is it brought out in a healthy manner to where people are expected to have opposing ideas, and you discuss and work your way through that? And then you start moving into things like team dynamics. Do you have trust with one another? Is trust built over time? Is it mutual? Are you cohesive? Are you collaborative? Are you exchanging information and ideas? And then the final element, that you could probably categorize as team empowerment. And does the team have a collective belief in the work that they're doing with a shared purpose? Does that formal leader have the willingness to give up and share their power, and not just give their team power, but truly share their power and cultivate that environment to where people are willing to exchange information, have roadblocks removed, and they can take that ball and run with it. They can take their segment of what's supposed to be done and have the left and right limits to move through. And what the research has found is that teams that share leadership have higher performance and all the things that come with it: higher job satisfaction, lower attrition rates. They're found to be more creative. They're found to be tighter knit groups, more trust amongst those teams. So it's this phenomenon when you step back and look at how work actually gets done. Shared leadership is there in the highest performing teams.
All right, Will. So that's a lot you threw right at us, and you shared so many great things. I want to recap a couple points that I took away from this. So you mentioned feel safe, feel comfortable. You started with that, and I love it. Simon Sinek is a leader that I follow. I love his stuff that he shares. He talks about this a lot on making sure that leaders allow their team and their people, their employees, to feel safe and feel like they're in a comfortable work environment. So I love that you mentioned that. Safe to make mistakes. How many times, and we've talked about toxic leadership, obviously, with you extensively, but how many times have we been in work situations where we have a leader that makes you feel like you can't make mistakes? And those are some of the worst experiences that people can have. It's okay to make a mistake. We learn from our mistakes. As long as we're not continuously making the same ones over and over again, you make a mistake, you learn from it, you move on, and you grow from it. So I love that you mentioned that. You talked about culture. That is a big hot topic right now going on in the workforce in 2022. It's been going on for the last 2-3 years as we've done a lot of research on it, but culture is huge. How is conflict resolved? Yeah, I wrote that down right here. I think so many leaders are fearful of conflict, right? But the most successful leaders understand that this is a part of being a leader. It's going to happen, and how you handle that situation when it arises speaks volumes to your character and how you operate as a leader. Here's a big thing that I took away too: trust. You talked about trust. If we're working for somebody and we don't trust them, there is absolutely no success, in my opinion, that's ever going to happen, right? I mean, you have to trust your leader in order to have results. Shared purpose and a belief in what you're doing. If we as leaders can share our vision on where we want our company to go and how we want our people to be a part of it, that's really, really, really huge in being able to inspire our team to do great things. And another thing that you just mentioned is leader sharing power. I think that speaks volumes to top leaders. Sometimes leaders don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to, open up to their people. But the best leaders understand that it's not about them. They don't have all the answers. And it's really, really critically important to share that power with your team. You're going to help them grow. You're going to help them become great leaders eventually as well. So I could talk to you for hours about this, Will, but that's just kind of a recap on what I took away. So much stuff that you shared. Why don't you just touch on a little bit now of some stuff that you've learned from your time in the military, and some experiences that you may have potentially had that revolve around shared leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I picked up recently, is that this idea of mission command, that a commander can't be everywhere on a battlefield. It's so vast and so wide that this idea of, let me give you your left and right limits. I'll share my intent as a commander. I'll share commander's intent. And then you've got the operating room to maneuver down there. So the expectation is that you do step up. Thinking through shared leadership. In 2005, I deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was with a maintenance company. I was the executive officer, second in command for that company, and I had a platoon of about 116 soldiers. And we also, when we arrived, we got an additional mission to do maintenance recovery. So any vehicle that was disabled, broke down on the supply routes, we'd get called out. If they couldn't self-recover, we'd get called out to recover those vehicles and bring them back. So that was an additional duty for us. We ran 2 teams, 24 hours on, 24 hours off. Initially, I was not assigned as an officer in charge of one of those teams, but some things changed while we were deployed, and I got assigned to be one of the officers in charge of one of those 2 teams. So like I said, we ran 24-hour shifts. It was a cross-functional team. So we had elements from a different company, the heavy equipment transport system operators. We had crane operators that were part of the transportation company, vehicle recovery specialists, people that ran our wreckers. We had security teams. Then a team had a non-commissioned officer in charge and an officer in charge. And I was appointed as an OIC for one of those teams. So we had this cross-functional team of experts, people that knew how to recover wrecks and big, massive, heavy equipment, and people that were just maintainers that were trained on how to pull security and pull guard and secure a site when we arrived on there. People that were operating the heavy equipment transport systems, which were like up armored 18-wheelers. So we had this team that we had to pull together. And here I am. I had to integrate onto a new team that was already established, already successful, already had some of their operating procedures down pat. And I'm not trained on any of that. So I'm not a recovery specialist. I'm not a heavy equipment operator. I had to quickly understand what the team's needs were, what their resources were, and integrate myself as the formal leader, the person who's in charge. Because as the officer in charge, ultimately, whatever happened when we got called on a mission was my responsibility, and I was accountable for that. So I immediately talked to the officer in charge of the other team, well respected, Chief David Hooker, one of the best warrant officers I've ever worked with. Got his take on things, got his insight and his advice. Then I talked to my NCOIC, Sergeant Novark. I worked with him in the past, leading up to our deployment, trusted him. And we had an open conversation, what was working well, what was not working well. So we started going through these processes, the transition processes of bringing a new leader on, changing the team composition, and then understanding what was working well for them and what wasn't. And one thing that wasn't working well was the centralized decision making. When we were on site, one of the keys to success, two main things had to happen for recovery missions. One, you had to secure the recovery site, and 2, you had to safely recover the vehicle and bring it back to our operating base. And speed was our friend, because our enemy has a vote. They were, they were always looking at transitioning and coming up with their new tactics. As we adapted tactics, they adapted tactics. It was cat and mouse. So improvised explosive devices, they were figuring out how to pierce our armored vehicles. They knew that if they destroyed a vehicle on a convoy, that our recovery team was going to come out. So they started setting up secondary attacks along the way. So we had to get in, secure that site, recover that vehicle, and come on back, which wasn't always easy. So immediately started building trust with Sergeant Novark and the team. And what we talked about was decentralizing decision making on site. He and two other members of our team there had gone to school to learn how to recover vehicles. They were the experts. I felt confident doing security. I said, okay, when I'm on site, I'll be the central communication hub, but you've got recovery, I'll take security. Done. So what that gave us, that trade-off, was I trust you. You have my intent. You know what's expected. Go execute. Take the 3 or 4 people you need and break off and do your recovery. I'm going to do security. That gave us speed when we established our site. So we talked about that plan, and our next step then was to integrate into the team. So we brought the team together and discussed the change in me coming on as the OIC, and we communicated the changes that we talked about. So I stood up in front of the team, about 15 soldiers of mine, some I had worked with before, some I hadn't because it'd come from a different company. First thing I did was thank them for what they were doing. It was an additional duty we needed to do, and they were doing it well. I praised their competence on what they were doing. Sergeant Novark and I talked to him about what we wanted to change, and I flat out told him, I'm not the expert. Yes, I'm responsible for what happens. Yes, I have that authority. Yes, I have the accountability, but I need you to have a voice. Tell us what you need, what resources you need, what tactics do you need to adjust, what do you need to adapt, what do you need to be most proficient. We're going to incorporate that into our after action reviews when we get back from mission, and our off day, we're going to reset, re-equip, and train on and practice anything new that we need to incorporate. So immediately it was me as the formal leader. I'm empowering that team, and I am giving them my trust. I am giving them my confidence, and I am giving them the space to operate as they see fit, which was a bit of a shift. And that worked out well for us. So we conducted over 75 plus maintenance recovery missions. We had 0 fatalities on our team during our time in theater. So taking that risk of empowering the subordinates in decision making, giving them intent, allowing them to take initiative on site and execute paid off. And I remember there's a few missions that came about where we wanted to change tactics. And one of the tactics we had was our when we had our up armored Humvees, sometimes getting doors open after a wreck was difficult to try to maybe extract people, and time is of the essence. So we had a mission one time. It was actually our last mission. Before that, one of the warrant officers designed this hook system that would latch onto the doors, and then we had a winch and a system that would retract this cable. So the hooks attached to the cable, they'd retract out. So the team came up with this all on their own. They designed it, they fabricated it, they tested it, and they said, hey, we're going to put this tool in our tool bag. And if we ever need it, we need to use it. Okay, but we're going to make sure we practice it. We're going to make sure it works. So, they took the initiative. They led the charge with finding the resources and getting this pulled together. And our very last mission, we actually needed to use it. And we came up on site, and it was another convoy, and they had wrecked. They were a gravel truck that were hauling gravel. Gravel spilled out. They had a couple vehicles in that skidded off the gravel road, and one truck, actually a 5-ton truck, flipped on its side. So we were called out to recover that vehicle, pull the truck up. But we get on site, and again, there's a couple soldiers that are injured, that are beat up, banged up from the wrecks. And what we found there was a soldier that was his leg was trapped between the chassis and the door. So my team, without direction, because we were so well oiled, we had gone through those team processes. The combat lifesaver started administering first aid and assessing the wounded soldiers. The security team set up security. We called in our position and our mission, and then we start looking at what we're going to do to try to save this soldier and get him out of that position. So here come out the hooks. So ironically, the hooks in this situation weren't the appropriate tool. the way that the door was crushed and the way that the soldier's leg was trapped in, the hooks on the pivot point pulled would cut more into their leg. In the meantime, the soldier's leg is bleeding and they're in a lot of pain. But because the team had the initiative and they had the confidence in what do we do next, they adjusted. So I had CEOs say, hey, we have a heat blanket, we have a plasma cutting torch, and we have a tanker bar. We need to put the blanket in and cut the hinges off. So I said, are you sure that's going to work? It's not going to injure anything anymore. They said, that's the last shot we have. I said, let's do it. So I'm up on the top of a Humvee with this tanker bar, because that's where my team needed me. They needed me at that time because everyone else was doing their assignment. So I was the extra set of hands, helping pry this door open. They had the heat blanket, plasma torch. They cut that door right off. It popped out. The soldiers was able to get out right as the helicopter's landing. They get on the combat lifesavers, and the medics from the helicopter got him on that bird and saved his leg. Long story short, saved his leg. So my point being, Al, is the team was empowered. The team had resources. The team had trust and was a cohesive unit to be able to think on the fly and come up with solutions. And we were able to get a quick decision made. And now in the military, and that, especially in a combat zone, that's the matter between life and death. You have similar opportunities with less severe consequences in business, if you think about it. So if you're willing to give up that authority, I had the responsibility for our soldiers' lives, which was a solemn responsibility, and that will have a heavy weight on you when you carry it. And if I was able to do that, looking back and reflecting on the past, if I was able to do that and build that trust with those team members, when we look at our left and our right in business, whether you're manufacturing something or in a distribution center or wherever you may work, getting to that point to where you're able to build trust, have psychological safety, the right person with the right skill at the right time doing the right things, you start sharing in that leadership responsibility. It takes a little bit of that burden off the formal leader, and it puts a whole lot of positive on those members of that team.
Will, that's those are some incredible stories that you shared right there. First of all, thank you for your service in your time in the military. But you talked a lot when you talk about this concept of shared leadership. You talk about trust in your teammates and a belief. You talked a lot about empowering people, and I absolutely love that, because if there was not a concept of shared leadership and you guys didn't trust one another when you're in the military, to your point, that is the difference in life or death. You guys had zero fatalities from your time in the military. And that last story that you shared with us is incredible. You literally put the trust in your people to make the right decision to save this gentleman's life. And that's just an incredible, phenomenal story. And to your point that you mentioned, a lot of times in business, it's not life or death. But if we took the right mindset as leaders, this concept of shared leadership, where would we be as a society? And it's critically important for us as leaders to do the right thing, trust our teams, empower them, allow them to feel safe, feel comfortable in their environment. So incredible stuff. Thank you for sharing some of your experiences with us. Will, I want to wrap it up right here. You've mentioned Lauren's name quite a bit, and I believe it is Lauren that you're doing some work with right now. But you have a book that is coming out that's going to be released. Why don't you share a little bit about your research and what it is that you're working on right now in this book?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Wow, thank you for the opportunity. Dr. Lauren DiNincenzo and I are writing a book, Power of the Pack, and it's really about how shared leadership builds high-performing teams, and how shared leadership can take your team to that next level of performance. So the book is going to be written as a practitioner book, but can be utilized in MBA classes, in business classes. But the idea is that we are going to bridge the gap between research and academics and practice. So her research and the research of her colleagues is what we're going to stand on to explain these elements of team environment, team composition, team dynamics, team processes, team empowerment. And we also interviewed leaders from the field, from CEOs to senior vice presidents to middle managers to team members along the way, to get their perspective of what it's like out there in in organizations and business today, so we can have the science and the practice come together and share this knowledge with how you can cultivate shared leadership within your team and for your team members, to increase performance and to improve the work and to improve the overall work environment. Bottom line is it's great to improve numbers. Simon Sinek will tell you, great leaders, they don't sacrifice people for numbers, they sacrifice numbers for people. So if you take care of people, and a way to do that is to keep them inspired, to keep them influenced, to give them voice, to give them a safe environment where they want to come into work and they feel like they're contributing. Shared leadership is a way to do that. And what our hopes with our book is to be able to do that, to give that knowledge to practitioners to share. And we're currently under contract with Stanford University Press. Thank you to Stanford University Press for believing in our project. And our official manuscript is due October of this year. So we'll see. A few months after that, hopefully, we'll have a published book to share with leaders and team members in the field.
Perfect. So hopefully, first part of 2023, this book is gonna be available to all of us. So Power of the Pack. I'm looking forward to picking it up and reading it. I want a signed copy, Will, okay? So that's what I'm looking for. But honestly, can't thank you enough. Again, this is, I think, the third time talking to you on our podcast, on our little platform here. You bring so much valuable insight, so much amazing work, and so much passion behind leadership and really leading the right way. So we need more people in the world like you, Will. We'll continue to find topics for you to share on our platform, and we hope to talk to you again in the very near future. But in the meantime, continue to do fantastic things out there, and can't thank you enough, Will.
Al, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Always enjoy our conversations.
Absolutely.